Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance Rehab Podcast, proudly presented by Firefly Recovery, Engage Movement, and Pura Health Ultrasound. Joining me today is Giuseppe Rosaci. Giuseppe and I are going to be diving into isometric training, one of my favorite topics to discuss. Giuseppe was mentioned on some of our past podcasts, including the one with Dustin Aranchuk several times. So great to have him on the podcast and dive into this. Be sure you subscribe to the show if you haven't already so you don't miss out on upcoming episodes like this. And please leave a 5-star review on your favorite platform. That way we can reach and help more people just like you. Enjoy. Giuseppe, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today. And obviously, huge shout out to our mutual friend, Dustin. He referenced you several times that way. And I'm not sure if we would have gotten connected without him. So for people who aren't familiar with you and your research work and your interest in isometric training, would you mind filling them in a little bit about who you are and all the amazing stuff you've got going on?
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to invite me there in your podcast. And sorry in advance for my English, for my grammatical errors, but I try to be very clear, to explain you very calm. And I'm so glad to be here with you. So my name is Giuseppe Rosaci, University of Bologna, and to date my research focuses on isometric training and more specifically about acute and chronic physiological responses after isometric training. I also work with my supervisor, Sandro Bartolomeo, on muscle architecture and adaptation muscle tendon unit. And for this reason, I did some research about gymnastics, isometrics, and also research about muscle architecture.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fascinating stuff. And it's interesting you bring up the combination of gymnastics and isometrics because personally, that's where I first started to kind of introduce isometric training into my own kind of workouts and that sort of thing several years ago. That way is I noticed that the gymnasts are jacked. Like the amount of things that they can do, the positions they can hold, and the
Well,
pound for pound strength they display is absolutely unbelievable. So I started to work a lot of different HEMA isometrics or yielding isometrics, some people call them, into my training at the time, especially like L-sit and different things on the rings, because I noticed visually that gymnasts had the kind of aesthetic that I wanted as a guy in college that way. So I was like, I'm willing to try some of this in my training that way, and I think my training's evolved over time, and now I still do plenty of HEMAs, don't get me wrong, but I also incorporate some PEMAs that way, and we've discussed both of those at length in past podcasts with Danny and Dustin and many others that way. Would love to hear your thoughts and breakdown of isometrics, HEMA versus PEMA, where you
yeah.
see them used best, and if you're using them interchangeably or for different things. There's been a lot of discussion and debate around this, I feel.
Yeah, we can speak about, no worries. So, in the last time, the isometrics training, adaptation, isometric changes are a topic very trend in the literature and also in the physiotherapists and all the other topics. So we need to start saying that today, PIMA and EMA, we have the evidence that say that are very different. Okay, in a lot of things. Firstly, we can do that. PIMA are two of the muscle action typical of isometric training. While PIMA, also called pushing isometric muscle action, or also force task, mean to push or to pull against an immovable object. PIMA, holding isometric muscle action, also called yielding or calling position task, way to try to pull or push, but holding our external weight, not versus an inamovable object. We have a lot of difference between PIMA and EMA. To start, we can say that EMA is like a lengthening interruption action, in comparison to PIMA, pushing isometric muscle action, that has an action like a concentric phase, more close to concentric phase, while the holding isometric muscle action is more closely to eccentric phase. The holding isometric muscle action, it's like has a very complex motor control strategy in comparison to pushing isometric muscle action. Principally, we can say that this motor control strategy, more complex in IMA, is characterized by a different feedback. So our brain is more difficult to receive a feedback, to come back a feedback in the muscle to stay in the same position. The difference in pushing isometric muscle action, where you have only to pull or to push, let's say inamovible objects. So the feedback is very easy between the two conditions. Secondly, we can say also that holding isometric muscle action for the feedback and the motor control strategy more complex has also more muscle synergies in comparison to pushing isometric muscle action, where agonist and antagonist muscle are more connected in comparison to push. These two types of training of muscle action are typically more confused also in the literature, where a lot of influencers say that, okay, holding isometric muscle action, we have to do with a long time under tension, while pushing isometric muscle action, we have to do only with short time under tension. But why? I can do holding isometric muscle action with short contraction time. So I can do also pushing isometric muscle action with long contraction times. So depends from the aim, depends from the periodization, depends of a lot of things. I would like also to introduce another muscle action that typically the people never speak about, that is called co-contraction type. The co-contraction muscle action, while holding isometric muscle action, we hold an external object, and pushing isometric muscle action, push or pull verso an inamovible object. Co-contraction muscle action is like called the bodybuilding type. So where we contract simultaneous agonist and antagonist muscle. Think about posing in the bodybuilding. It's the same exact things. And there are also a lot of research about use of co-contraction muscle action for untrained people, untrained individual, or individual that maybe in hospital ambient that can't move because are lying in the bed. So co-contraction muscle action is useful for this type of individuals also. In addition, a lot of influencers, most of the influencers speak also about other type of muscle action, like quasi-isometric training, oscillatory training, isotonic isometrics. However, I think that this type of isometrics are not real muscle action, but is only a combination of different methods like concentric, eccentric, plus isometric. It's not very isometric like pushing or pulling isometric muscle action. So I disagree with these people that say that oscillatory isometric, for example, is a muscle action. No, it's a combination of different type of contraction. Yeah. Yeah. You agree? What do you think?
Yeah, no, you have a very interesting breakdown that way. And to build off your point on the co-contraction, that is something that does not get discussed often. Yet, if we think about movement in nature, right? Like, let's pick any kind of exercise that way. Like, let's take the deadlift, for example, right? Like, in a deadlift, we're lifting a bar off the ground. A lot of times people look at something like that and they think it's a lower body exercise, right? Because the hamstrings are working, the glutes are working, and all that sort of thing. And yes, movement is occurring about those joints at the hip, at the knee, and so on that way. But looking at the upper body, we don't want movement in the upper body, right? We don't want our shoulders drifting forward or backwards when we're deadlifting. We want everything as solid and stable and locked in place as we can get it, right? So our ability to create isometric force, that is muscular force in all of these different joints without moving, will give us more strength and stability to complete the deadlift, right? If we have anything in the upper half of the body that is moving, it shouldn't be moving, our deadlift performance is going to suffer as a result of that. And to me, that's like the simplest example of the co-contraction, right? Like, I'm not going to just like contract my triceps in the deadlift. I want everything to be tight and stiff and locked in place so that no movement is occurring and I'm as rigid and stiff as possible. I picked this up when I was doing a little bit of strongman training with guys like Greg Inocencio, Jeff Kriglick, and so on. That way is just this combination of not just creating tension in the muscles that are working, but also all of the other muscles as well, and the impact that that can have on the performance of the exercise. And a while ago, I was messing around with a Surface EMG product and hand grip, and I was amazed by the difference in rotator cuff muscle activation, in particular the infraspinatus, how much more activation I would get when I literally just changed how hard I gripped something, right? Like, again, we're not moving whatsoever. We're just exerting more effort and getting way more activation out of it. So, to your point, I feel like that side of this is not often discussed. And it's something that I think opens up a wide array of applications to sport, whether that's the training for it in like a gym or fitness center that way, and the actual sport itself on field.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very uh, lost out that like a contraction. So, what is important is I feel so most of the study that was conducted on isometric training included most of them only pushing isometric muscle action. So we don't have a lot of study about holding isometric muscle action. However, I think now with the trend of this year, a lot of researchers started to study this type of contraction. I think a lot of study will be present at the end of the year to show the difference on recovery, on muscle tendon adaptation, or muscle damage, intraset fatigue, a lot of type of study. I worked about on isometric muscle action and pushing isometric muscle action on muscle damage, for example. Now is a study that under review on European Journal of Applied Physiology. And yeah, I think it's a very interesting topic that we have to expand. We have to expand, and we are ready now with the instruments to expand the knowledge about holding and pushing. For example, also the knowledge about the lengthening and the shortening action in holding and pushing. Now we can expand our knowledge using ultrasound in real time. Before it was very difficult also because the technology didn't permit but now with new technology, a more smart technology, um, the possibility to have everything on our smartphone in real time help us researcher to expand the knowledge about holding and pushing isometric muscle action. So we have also to consider that different variable could be managed in holding and in pushing to aim a different adaptation only in one period or only in another period. Depends. Most important variable that we can manage in holding and in pushing is the muscle length. Absolutely. There are a lot of study on long muscle length conditions, but only in pushing isometric muscle action. We can manage the intensity, and this is a very complicated things. Manage the intensity in isometric training. And it's also often low studied. There aren't a lot of research about intensity in isometric training. We can manage the time under tension, the total volume, the intraset recovery time. This variable can be managed in the periodization. Depends from the aim that we are leading to.
Absolutely. No, you bring up some interesting points there. And to your point about the muscular length differences and how a lot of that has been studied extensively thus far with PIMAs, not necessarily HEMAs yet. I know this is an area that you've done some research in yourself that way. One of the many things that you've got out on the research gate that way. And it's one of those things that I think a lot of people forget, right? I talk about this a lot. We forget about the general specific adaptation to imposed demand principle, right? And if I'm isometrically training or loading a muscular group or a joint position at a longer length, do we really expect that to carry over to shortened muscle lengths and vice versa? Most people will say probably not. So going back to that specific adaptation to imposed demand principle at the end of the day is ultimately very, very essential. And I believe in your own study, looking at that long versus short length and the adaptations accordingly, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I remember, we had about 12 individuals, about 25 years old. So, roughly our age that way. And then you had different long muscle length and short muscle length isometrics, multiple sets, fairly short contractions. I think it was. I think it was like a 5-second max effort. I think was one of them. And then there was also a band condition that way as well, where basically the bands were calibrated to have either 90% of short muscle length force, and I think 20% long force that way. And from what I remember, you were looking at ultrasound findings, but also you were looking at ISO peak force and bench press testing as well that way. And also some physiological stuff with creatine phosphokinase, I think was one of the main biomarkers you looked at in that study. Would you mind expanding, elaborating on that, correcting anything I missed, and kind of further breaking down what you found yourself that way in relation to shortened and lengthened muscle length in relation to the isometrics?
So long muscle length and short muscle length are a variable that was extremely studied in the adaptation, but also in muscle damage. About muscle damage, most of the study evidenced like long muscle length training lead to a more muscle damage in comparison to short muscle length exercise. These studies were conducted on leg and arm, where in arm the muscle is very short and uniform, while the leg are different expansion angle. We want to say that long muscle length in both studies, resulted more muscle damage in comparison to short, because also there was higher internal force in long muscle length condition in comparison to short muscle length condition. No studies were conducted on the muscle trunk, so me and my supervisor, my research group, decided to study the long muscle length and short muscle length on the pectoral major muscle. In addition, we added also another variable in the study that was the variable resistance training, where we paced to long muscle length to short muscle length condition using a loop band. That was a trend in the last year in strength and conditioning coach. So the question was, long muscle length is more damage than short muscle length and the variable, or the variable resistance training was more damage, more soreness in comparison to long muscle and short muscle length, because we have a older ROM in variable. So we started with the studies. However, the three protocols had the same muscle damage in peak force, in average power and bench press throw, in muscle soreness measured with a visual analog scale, in creatine phosphokinase. The reason was that in short muscle length, in pectoral measured muscle, the internal force in short muscle length was higher in short muscle leg than the internal force carried out at long muscle leg condition in a chest fly exercise. So this is the problem why I didn't found muscle. Was by a higher internal force in short muscle leg condition. Are you following me? I don't know if it's clear.
I think I'm following so far that way, and essentially
Okay.
one of the things you mentioned that really stands out to me is that your results were
Yeah.
really suggesting that performance recovered quickly across all 3 conditions.
Yes,
However,
exactly.
from the ultrasound, the muscle thickness stayed
Yeah, was
longer.
higher.
It was higher
Yeah.
after the variable resistance, right? So there's
Yes.
essentially
Yes.
some kind of disconnect between output and local tissue recovery that I see
Yeah.
there, right?
Because the pumping effect of the loop band in variable resistance training probably uh, lead the muscle thickness to be higher 4 hours later. However, we can say that the increase in muscle thickness is high correlated to the muscle damage and to the decrease in average power at bench press stroke. Also because we did a correlation between the drop, the drop in power, the drop in T4, and the muscle thickness, and no correlation were found. So we have inflammation, but it's not enough to decrease significantly the performance.
Right. So it didn't change the performance. However, there was that disconnect in that the local tissue stayed thicker following the band that way. And I guess I'm also interested, when you were doing the ultrasound, did you by chance note what that muscle thickness was representing on the ultrasound? Was it more of a architecture or a fluid shift or anything along
Yeah.
along those lines?
Probably was the fluid shift. Also because the muscle rep intensity didn't change in the 3 condition, long muscle length, short and variable. It probably was the fact that also the glycogen depletion was not very high
Mm.
in the 3 condition, especially in short muscle length and low muscle length. This could be to think that give us the possibility to feel that probably there was a different stress. While variable resistance exercise was closer to metabolic stress, isometric training were more closely to mechanical stress.
Gotcha. Yep. Yeah, no, that makes sense, and one of the other reasons I asked that ultrasound question is obviously just within the design of the study itself, each subject was acting as their own control, so it's like, it's nice to be able to see that kinda pre-post same person effect that way, and obviously, I love diving into the research and discussing the differences around different types of isometrics that way, but one of the things you and I had been chatting about recently is obviously that application to, the bigger picture of things that way, if you will. And one of the things that comes up quite a bit is the programming side of isometrics and how do we periodize and progress isometric training that way. And I've heard a lot of different things about this from a lot of different people. And many of them have this kind of concept or philosophy that they're working with where they what do I want to say? They start with a longer duration isometric that is less intense, and then they gradually progress the intensity of the isometric while reducing the duration of the isometric. However, with that said, I'm not sure that there's really anyone that's come up with a true periodization approach for isometrics specifically as far as where they fit in the framework that way. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of periodizing these isometrics based on, linear models, undulating models, and where do we start with isometric training when we're going to incorporate this? Because a lot of athletes and active individuals haven't really done a whole lot of isos outside of maybe some planks and wall sits.
So yeah, we can speak about periodization. I would like to introduce the periodization topics. Say that an athlete, or a lot of athletes, never do only isometric training. So when we speak about periodization in isometric, we have to think that have to be a training like a support to the main training of the athletes. The athlete can do all isometric. The people say that athlete can do all isometric. Wrong. I disagree completely. Imagine that we have strength and power athletes, and we want to periodize to create a periodization, a block periodization. Okay, are you follow me? In USA, it's also called traditional periodization, where we have three blocks: accumulation, transformation, realization. So the first block, the aim of the first block is to lead a muscle tendon unit, so to work on muscle architecture, to working on tendon adaptation. The second block, maybe we can focus on strength, and the last block, we can focus on power. So inside these three blocks, we use different approaches in isometrics. In the first block, if the aim is to accumulate a lot of volume, I suggest to use analytic exercise, okay? For example, leg extension, leg curl, and to work on muscle length condition. Only long muscle length condition. I would like to have two approaches to space. Using holding isometric muscle action and using pushing isometric muscle action. Why? I'll explain you. So we have to use analytics exercise with a lot of volume, high volume, with holding isometric muscle action, with a continuous contraction, with a volume more than 200 seconds, so very high, using holding, but also quasi-eccentric isometric training. Aim of this type of contraction, holding isometric with continuous time under tension, a lot of time under tension, aim to increase the mass mass, and the muscle thickness have to be directed by a longer fascicle length, a longer fascicle. Okay, are you following me, bro?
Yeah, okay, I'm with you so far.
Okay, yeah. The intensity problems, what I've to use in this phase? I suggest a continuous contraction, a lot of volume, okay, I said that, but I can use a percentage of one repetition maximum. It's very difficult. We don't have studies confirm in relation, the intensity in relation of one repetition maximum. So if we don't have a dynamometer using push, but it's not the case, I like to set a weight that all of us reach, for example, 30 seconds, 35 seconds, 40 seconds, 45 seconds under tension, and to arrive at the end of the contraction that we set with the maximum of fatigue. So the aim is to reach 40 seconds with an external weight, but without measure relation of one repetition maximum. It's very, very, very difficult. This is the first, because push as hard as possible to reach the maximum strain in repetitive way. For example, 4 sets for 4 repetitions for 4 seconds. So different approach for muscle, continuous contraction, holding isometric muscle action. For tendon, pushing isometric muscle action. Short contraction, repetitive contraction, a lot of strain. Because we know from the that tendon adapt to the mechanical stress and to the repetitive strain. In the second block, we can switch the focus. We can work on strength using only pushing isometric muscle action, where a long muscle length in long muscle length condition or in the sticking point of the competitive exercise. Why only long muscle length conditions? Different study, like for example the study of Danny Lumo, evidenced has training a long muscle length condition for 1 RM, for example in bench press, in the dynamic range, is the same that to training in 3 different angles of the movement. Then that I really like researcher, I really like it. He studied the bench press in long muscle length condition and the bench press in long, medium, and short muscle length condition, and say that for the 1 RM, the two groups had the same improvement in 1 RM in the dynamics. So in a block where the aim is the strength, we can work only on long muscle length condition because it's the same to work in 3 different angles. Work on 3 different angles, for example, in the exercise competition, can lead only to accumulate fatigue. Fatigue that we don't need fatigue to accumulate fatigue. However, in a power block, in the periodization, now we can do isometric training in multi-angle of the competitive exercise because the same study of the Nilum evidenced that like while training a long muscle length condition is the same of 3 different angle training, all 1 RM, training in multi-joint position in the same competitive exercise is better for power. So if our last aim is to enhance the power, we can use isometric training in different position of the same competitive exercise. For example, 19 degree, 60 degree, 50 degree in the bench press. This is better for power. This is a different approach. Yeah, the intensity in these 2 blocks, in strength and power blocks, have to be the maximum effort. Maximum effort. In the strength block, we use a ramping isometric. So I started very low to reach in 6 seconds, in 7 seconds, 8 seconds, my maximal isometric force. So I have to give to my body the time to reach the maximum peak. In the power block, we use the opposite. As hard as possible. Boom. Immediately. We don't give time to our body to reach the peak. The aim is the peak rate of force development.
Right.
In both case, so besides analytic exercise like in the first phase of our periodization. This is very important.
Right.
This is very important.
So essentially, just to kind of recap here, is for periodization of the isometrics, you propose doing 3 different blocks, having a
Yes.
high volume holding isometric continuous tension at long muscle length. That's going to primarily give us some muscular mass building effects and so on that way. And then we're going to transition into what you called the transformation phase. This is where we start to enter with pushing isometrics at longer muscle lengths. And then we get into the realization phase, which incorporates multiple joint isometrics at multiple different angles, specifically to enhance power output, not explosiveness. If you're still using the term explosiveness in 2026, Giuseppe is coming for you. We are specifically looking for power output.
Explosive is okay. Explosive is okay. Ballistic is not that for isometric.
So that sounds like your philosophy there thus far. Did I summarize that correctly?
Yeah, it's correct. It's correct. That's right. You're right.
Absolutely. So that's how you approach it for the majority of your athletes that way by the sounds, right? Having that three block that way.
Yeah. If I have a strength and power athlete, yeah. Yes. However, if I have a gymnast, a ring specialist, I work in a different way.
Okay. Now, obviously, that's all well and good with keeping it very simple, right? HEMAs, PEMAs, mix everything that way. Have you ever done any of these other types of isometrics as part of that? Like, I feel like every time I open Instagram, someone's coming up with a new isometric. I'm talking EQIs, functional isometrics, ballistic isometrics, isometric switches, isometric catches, pseudo isometrics, ballistic isometrics, iso catches. Does any of that enter the picture for you, or are we leaving it simply HEMA and PEMA?
EMA, bro. I told you I don't like this new type of isometrics like ballistics, switches. I only use the eccentric quasi isometric training. That yes, in a phase of the periodization is very important. We have a reference about eccentric quasi isometric training, but we don't have reference about other type of isometric. I can suggest you. I'm a researcher. I can suggest you to use that. Also, why I have to use that? Another. So I said that also with my supervisor that validated a new system for isometric training. It's called VISB, but VISB is not a muscle action. What I mean, my supervisor validated a system that you use a magnet if you don't reach a maximal isometric force that you set to the computer, you can do the power training. So imagine that a full exercise, if you reach a maximal force to set with the computer, the barber get off the magnet and you you jump. For a lot of people, this could be isometrics exercise training, but isn't isn't is isometric plus concentric. It's a new form of isometrics.
Right, right, absolutely. And as you were talking as well, you also made the point that you don't just do isometrics only. There's always other exercise things done with them. And I'm thinking back to a conversation I had last year on the podcast with Tex McQuilkin, and he shared something similar is he loves isometrics, but he always follows his isometrics with dynamic movements and dynamic exercises. It's never isometrics only. It's never isometrics alone that way. However, with the rise of isometrics, I've seen, I think it's called the omni contraction method that's been getting thrown around more commonly, or I've seen it more, where there's literally a whole day of just isometric training in the program. How do you feel about this concept of we're going to dedicate one day a week to strictly isometrics that way? Or if we're doing multiple days a week of isometrics only that way, the Omni method, I believe, I could be wrong about this, but I believe it's a concentric day, an eccentric day, and an isometric day. And on one hand, I know a lot of people getting great results with it, so don't want to stop it. But on the other hand, it's just different than the way my brain thinks about things.
I can say you that I don't like the idea to make only a day dedicated to isometric training. I'm a very fan of isometric training. It's my work, but I can say that I would like to do only a dedicated session isometric training. I need that athletes need concentric, need power, need eccentric, not only isometrics. Yeah, isometrics is very correlated with strength dynamic performance, but we can do only that. I don't like the idea. I'm essentialist about.
Yeah. No, I'm right there with you. I think everything coming together is the art and the science of this space. It's not just any one thing. You can't just do eccentric.
Yeah,
You can't just do BBT. You need all of it together. And I think the better you are at putting all of the pieces together, the more effective you become as a coach, clinician, professional, whoever that way. And I mean, the only time that I've really done ISOs only for an extended period of time has been the post-op population, right? Like, hey, when you just had a major surgery and this is all we can do, something is always better than nothing. But, there's clinical populations. That's a much separate discussion. We're going to need a whole nother hour to get into the weeds on that way.
Yeah, sometimes athletes use the isometric training only with the reduced pain before the normal training, for example. We have evidence that isometrics in a specific joint could reduce the pain, for example, on the patellar tendon or on the knee before the training with a long ISO. It's okay. Maybe athletes can use isometric also for this before the concentric training, the isotonic training, the isokinetic training could be an option. Yeah, but more physiotherapeutic direction. But it's okay. We have evidence about.
Absolutely. What's been kind of your personal favorite application of isometric exercise or isometric training that you've done yourself or that you've been seeing from others?
In the past, I loved to make only isometric muscle action in the pull-up exercise.
Yep.
I really love the feeling to hold the pull-up at 19 degree with a lot of weight attached to my belt. This is very. I love the feeling. Okay, maybe I can be not useful in that period, but I like it. If I like, I do it. Yeah, but also I really wanted to do bench press isometrics
Yep.
and long muscle length on the yeah. But to start to hold when the barbell touch your chest. Okay, now can I put the barbell on the rack again? Oh, it's it's a problem every time that you finish isometric on bench press to think how to put the barbell again on the rack. And this the feeling that you are broken here. Uh, is can you be? Yeah, I like it. I like it. It's the same. I have seen a lot of beautiful exercise on web. I yeah on on the leg. One of most beautiful exercises that I've seen on the website was the starting block from 100 meters run. They invented a system to block the athletes in the starting position with a 45 degree and to push with the leg to simulate the starting of the track and field sports, of the run. Uh, Really liked. I was impressed. Wow! Because sometimes, bro, I think the innovation, the idea, the capacity to use the brain to make new instrument, to make new system block for isometric training is the most important field for a coach. Try to invent. I said also to my student, use the brain. If you want to find a method, you find the method.
Right.
Difference. I read a paper very interesting about researchers that blocked a bike for a cyclist in way to do isometric trainings on the bike, isometric specific for cyclists. They use the brain. It's fantastic.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I think there's so many unique applications like that out there. And you're speaking my language with the pull up that way. That was the thing for me back in October. I absolutely love weighted pull ups. They're my favorite exercise ever. I think it's because at one point I couldn't do a single pull up, back middle school, 13 years old, little wet noodle arms that way. But now we're able to crank them out easily, and I had been stuck at 180-pound single rep, weighted pull-up PR. So my body weight plus 180 pounds on the belt. I was like, you know what? I want to beat it. It's October. I want to go all in 1 month and see what we can get it to. And we ended up ending that month with 205 pounds on the belt, which I'm glad the belt held up to it. So it was 445s and a 25. It was neutral grip. I'm sure someone out there is going to complain about that, but hey, I moved over 205 pounds. But the concept, we incorporated some PIMAs, which I did with a strap to actually resist pulling up that way, which worked very, very well. We did do some functional isometrics. I know they're not your favorite thing, but we did one set a week, and it was about 180 pounds. So, previous 1 rep max on the belt, pull up, and we had the strap catch at that certain spot that we were gonna hold it, and we'd hold it there 5 to 10 seconds. Very, very, max effort, very, very shaky. I'd be, beat up and sore after those, but, the benefits were unbelievable, right? Like, multi-year plateau, and we broke through it in 4 weeks, incorporating isometric into plenty of other pull-up training and other training methodologies that way as well. I think the big takeaways from that, again, one, it's anecdotal and it's a personal case study. So don't just go and do it tomorrow. Play around with it a little bit more, look into it a little bit more first. And two, isometrics were part of the program, but not the entire program, right? We still did plenty of reps of weighted pull-ups, different grips, different variations. We still did a lot of different row variations as well, because I think a lot of times when people want to PR at something, right? Like say you roll in, you're like, I want to bench press PR. They just bench press. And it's like, but what about all of the other functions of those muscles, right? Like if I want to bench press PR, I still have to find time or space in the program for maybe a vertical pressing pattern, for example. So I think ultimately, going back to what we said before, it's the art and science of putting all the pieces together, if you will. But I realize we can probably talk about this all day long that way. This is such a fun discuss,
Yeah.
and I really appreciate your detailed insights and perspectives on everything. Is there anything we missed as we were chatting today, or anything else you wanted to discuss today, Giuseppe?
Uh, I think we speak about a lot of things. If you have some question, maybe I can try to reply you. But I think we speak the most of the important things.
Absolutely. And for people who want to find out more about you, keep up to date with your work, and obviously reach out with questions, maybe social media handles, email, whatever. That way, where can they find you at online?
But they can find me on Instagram or email, writing my name, Giuseppe Rosaci, on Google. I have my personal page on the University of Bologna. I'm very available to speak for speaking, for podcasting, for speak with people. Yeah, that one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. We'll link to all of that in the description below. That way, if you didn't quite catch it, you can just click there and see everywhere Giuseppe is and all the different ways to contact him. So this was really awesome. I really appreciate your time and the insights that you shared with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, because to give me the possibility to speak with you, we will speak with the people about this type of argument. So I'm so glad to be here with you.